Marcus Webb had worked at Riverside Manufacturing for 11 years, which was longer than his marriage had lasted and longer than his daughter had been alive, though only by a few months on that second count. He started in receiving, moved to quality control after his third year, and settled into a rhythm that most people would call boring, but that Marcus considered a kind of mercy. He clocked in at 7. He clocked out at 3:30. He drove 9 minutes to pick up Lily from the after-school program at Eastwood Elementary, and the two of them went home to a duplex on Garner Street, where the porch light had been burning out every 6 weeks like clockwork since 2019. He was the kind of man other people describe by what he wasn't. Not loud, not difficult, not the type to make a scene. His supervisor, Rena Okafor, once told the HR coordinator that Marcus was the easiest employee she'd ever managed, and she'd meant it as a compliment, though something about the phrasing had always bothered her afterward in a way she couldn't quite name. What Rena didn't say, because she didn't know how to quantify it on a performance review, was that Marcus remembered things. He remembered that the woman in shipping, Deanna, had a son with a peanut allergy, so when his turn came to bring snacks for the break room, he brought sunflower butter cookies and didn't mention why. He remembered that the new hire in January, a kid named Terrell, who looked like he was barely old enough to rent a car, had mentioned offhand that his grandmother was in hospice. 2 weeks later, when Terrell came back from bereavement leave looking hollowed out and uncertain, Marcus left a card on his locker. Not a sympathy card, just a note that said the lunch schedule had shifted and Terrell could take the early slot if he wanted, since the cafeteria was quieter then. Nobody asked Marcus to do these things. That was the point, or maybe that was the problem. It depended on who you asked. Lily had turned 8 in March. She was small for her age, serious in a way that made strangers assume she was shy, though she wasn't shy so much as selective. She had her mother's wide-set eyes and her father's habit of watching a room for a long time before deciding whether it deserved her voice. Her mother, Christine, had moved to Tucson when Lily was 3. There was a custody agreement. There were phone calls on Wednesdays and every other Sunday. There was a distance of 1,400 miles that functioned, in practice, like a wall. Marcus did not talk about Christine at work. He did not talk about Christine much at all, except when Lily asked questions, which she did less and less frequently as the years went on. What he talked about, when he talked, was Lily swimming. She had started lessons at the YMCA when she was 5 because the pediatrician said it would be good for her coordination, and because Marcus had a quiet, bone-deep terror of his daughter not knowing how to save herself in water. By 6, she had moved to the competitive youth program. By 7, she was training 3 mornings a week before school, which meant Marcus was up at 5:15 on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, driving through the dark to the aquatic center with a thermos of coffee wedged between his knees and Lily half asleep in the back seat with her goggles already around her neck. He never complained about it, not because he was performing some kind of stoic fatherhood, but because it genuinely did not occur to him that this was something to complain about. His daughter loved the water. She was good at it. She came alive in it in a way she didn't quite come alive anywhere else. And watching that transformation 3 times a week was the closest thing Marcus Webb had to a religion. The company picnic was in 12 days. He hadn't given it a single thought yet. He would. Lake Callaway sat about 40 minutes east of the plant, down a county road that turned to gravel for the last mile and a half. The company had been renting the same pavilion since before Marcus started. A concrete slab with a rusted tin roof and picnic tables that had been repainted so many times the surfaces were lumpy with old latex. Someone from accounting always brought a portable speaker. Someone from the warehouse always forgot the ice. These were traditions as fixed and predictable as the manufacturing schedules Marcus had spent 11 years learning to read. He parked his truck in the grass lot at 11:10, later than he'd wanted. Lily had needed her braids redone that morning because she'd slept on them wrong, and he was still learning the particular geometry of a French braid, the way you had to keep tension even. Or the whole thing slipped sideways and she'd look at him in the bathroom mirror with that patient disappointment she'd inherited from someone, though he could never figure out who. She was at her grandmother's now. He'd be back by 4 to pick her up. The picnic was already loud by the time he crossed the lot. Smoke from 2 charcoal grills drifted across the pavilion in a haze that smelled like lighter fluid and cheap hot dogs. A volleyball net had been strung between 2 pines, already sagging in the middle where someone had hit it too hard. Children he half recognized were running through the shallows of the lake in bright swimsuits, their shrieks carrying across the water in that particular way sound travels over flat surfaces, sharp and clear, and then suddenly gone. Marcus found a table near the back, nodded to a few people, and fixed himself a plate. Potato salad, a burger, a handful of chips he didn't especially want. He ate slowly and watched the lake. He was comfortable here, in the way he was comfortable most places, which is to say, not entirely, but enough to stay. Dale Hutchins arrived around noon in a black pickup that was too clean for a man who owned a manufacturing plant. Dale was the kind of boss who wanted you to know he'd started on the floor, that he'd welded and cut and swept before he'd ever signed a paycheck for someone else. He mentioned it often enough that it had stopped being inspiring and had become simply a fact about him, like his height or the way he always wore boots, even to the Christmas party. Dale moved through the picnic the way he moved through the plant, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, remembering just enough about each person to make the conversation feel personal without actually being personal. He asked about wives and husbands by name. He asked about kids in a general way that suggested he knew they existed, but could not have picked them out of a lineup. He was not a bad man. Marcus had never thought he was a bad man. He was a man who owned things and had come to believe that ownership was a kind of wisdom. Around 1 o'clock, Dale climbed onto one of the picnic tables. Someone turned down the speaker. The conversations thinned out and then stopped, the way they do when a person with authority over your paycheck decides to stand above you. He had a beer in his hand, half finished, and he held it out to one side like a man making a toast. Swimming competition, he said. Him against any taker. Winner gets a full week of paid vacation, on the house. He grinned when he said it, and the grin was real, because Dale Hutchins genuinely believed he was being generous, and in a certain light, from a certain angle, he was. Then he added the rest of it, the part about the loser working the holiday weekend. No exceptions. He said those 2 words separately, giving each one its own space, the way people do when they want you to understand that they mean exactly what they are saying, and nothing else. The cheering had a different quality after that, thinner, more careful. Marcus set down his plate. Nobody moved at first. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from the grills, drifting over the picnic tables and the half-eaten plates of coleslaw and the children chasing each other near the tree line. Dale stood there with his chest puffed out the way it always got when he knew he had a room. That particular stance he took in quarterly meetings, right before he delivered numbers that made the floor managers sweat. He was enjoying this. You could see it in the way he rocked back on his heels, scanning the crowd for takers, his sunglasses pushed up on his forehead, like a man who wanted you to see his eyes when he won. A few of the younger guys from the warehouse elbowed each other. Tommy Fink looked like he was about to say something, then didn't. Carla from Accounts Receivable whispered something to her husband that made him shake his head. The silence stretched long enough that Dale started to grin wider, which was exactly the wrong thing to happen because it meant he was about to start calling people out by name, and nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted to be the person Dale Hutchins pointed at with a dripping barbecue fork and said, "Come on now. You scared of a little water?" Marcus was standing near the back. He had a paper plate balanced on one hand with a hot dog Lily had taken 2 bites of before abandoning it for the swing set. He was watching Dale the way he watched most things at work, which was carefully and from a distance that suggested he was calculating something private. 11 years he had been doing that, 11 years of showing up early and leaving on time, and knowing which machine on the floor was going to throw a belt before it threw a belt. He was not the kind of man who volunteered for things. He was the kind of man who got volunteered for things and then did them without complaint, which is a different species entirely. But something shifted in him. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the way Dale said no exceptions and the word landed somewhere specific in Marcus's chest, in the place where he kept all the times he had rearranged his life around a schedule that didn't care about his. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just looked over at Lily pumping her legs on the swing, her braids flying behind her, and did the math on what a free week would mean. A week where he could take her to the pool every morning. A week where he could sit on the apartment balcony after she went to bed and not think about third shift coverage. He set the paper plate down on the table beside him. He raised his hand. It was not a dramatic gesture. He didn't push through the crowd or raise his voice. He simply lifted his right hand about as high as his ear, the way a man might signal a waiter, and said, "I'll compete." The words came out level and unremarkable, the same tone he used when he told the floor supervisor that number 6 press needed recalibrating. Dale noticed him the way you notice something small moving at the edge of your vision. His grin shifted into something more curious. "Well now," Dale said. "Marcus Webb. Didn't figure you for a swimmer." "I'm not," Marcus said, "but I'll race." A few people laughed, not unkindly. There was something about the way Marcus said it that made you want to root for him even though you knew Dale had been on the swim team at State and still did laps at the county pool 3 mornings a week and had the shoulders to prove it. Marcus was lean and quiet and built for endurance, not speed. He looked like a man who could carry heavy things a long way, but not necessarily fast. "But I need one condition," Marcus said. And that was when the laughter stopped. The lake had gone quiet in that particular way that only happens when a group of people collectively decides to stop breathing. Even the children seemed to sense it, their splashing reduced to gentle ripples that lapped against the dock pilings, like whispered apologies for interrupting. Marcus could feel the weight of every pair of eyes. He had not planned this. He had not rehearsed anything in the bathroom mirror that morning, or talked himself into courage on the drive over. He had simply heard the terms of the bet, done the arithmetic in his head, and arrived at a number that did not work. If he lost, he would owe Dale the entire holiday weekend, Friday through Monday. And Saturday morning belonged to Lily. It had belonged to Lily since she was 4 years old and first put her face in the water at the community pool on Greenfield Avenue. She had come up gasping and laughing and immediately demanded to do it again. Marcus had stood in the shallow end in his work khakis because he had not thought to bring swim trunks, and he had held her under the arms while she kicked, and something in his chest had rearranged itself permanently. She had been swimming competitively for 2 years now. Her coach, a retired woman named Dottie, who smelled like chlorine and spoke in a permanent rasp, said Lily had a natural feel for the water. What Dottie did not say, because she was tactful in her own gruff way, was that Lily looked for Marcus in the bleachers before every single event. Not after, before. She would stand on the block in her 2 big goggles and scan the seats until she found him, and only then would she settle into her stance. He had never missed one, not when the transmission went out on the Honda and he had to take 2 buses, not when he pulled a double shift on Friday and slept for 3 hours on the couch with his shoes still on, not when his own mother called him foolish for driving 40 minutes to watch a child swim 50 meters in under a minute. "It takes her 43 seconds, he had told his mother, "and I need to be there for every one of them." So when Dale Hutchins asked him why, standing there with his arms crossed and his sunglasses pushed up on his forehead, and the confidence of a man who had never once had to choose between his paycheck and his child, Marcus did not deliver a speech. He did not make a case. He said 2 words and a possessive, "Lily's swim recital." He said it the way you might say the sky is blue or the coffee is ready. A fact so plain and so immovable that decorating it with justification would have been an insult to its truth. Dale's expression did something complicated. The smirk did not vanish so much as it stalled, caught between the face he wore for employees and some other face underneath that perhaps did not get enough light. He looked at Marcus the way you look at a man who has just set something heavy down on a table between you, and you realize you are the one who has to decide what to do with it. The crowd waited. Somebody's child started crying near the volleyball net and was quickly hushed. A dragonfly traced a wide arc over the water and landed on the edge of a cooler, trembling with the iridescent indifference of a creature that has no idea it is witnessing a moment. Marcus did not fidget. He did not add anything. He had said what he needed to say, and now he was finished saying it, and the silence that followed was not his silence to fill. He had learned that years ago, standing in a shallow end, in ruined khakis, watching his daughter's face break the surface of the water for the first time. Some things you only need to say once. Dale Hutchins had built Riverside Manufacturing from a rented garage bay and a line of credit his father-in-law never expected to see repaid. 23 years of 6-day weeks, of knowing every serial number on every machine, of signing the front of paychecks instead of the back. He had earned the right to be hard because hardness was what had kept the lights on when 3 competitors folded during the recession, and when the county tried to rezone his lot out from under him. People called him fair, and he was. But fairness in Dale's vocabulary had always meant the same rules applied to everyone. No exceptions, no sob stories, no special arrangements. That was the deal. You knew it when you took the job. So when Marcus Webb stood there at the edge of the lake, with his hands loose at his sides and asked for Saturday morning, Dale felt the old machinery of refusal turning over in his chest. It was automatic. The word no was already forming somewhere behind his teeth, the way it always did when someone tried to carve out a little exemption for themselves. He had said no to men with dying parents. He had said no to women with court dates. Not because he didn't care, but because the moment you started making exceptions, the whole structure softened, and then it collapsed, and then you were back in a rented garage bay wondering where it all went. He looked at Marcus. 11 years. The man had never once called in sick on a day that mattered, never once left early without making up the hours, never once complained about the overtime that wasn't really optional, though Dale had always been careful to frame it as a request. 11 years of showing up and doing the work and asking for nothing. And now he was asking for 4 hours on a Saturday morning so he could watch a little girl swim. Dale became aware of the silence. 40-some employees standing around with paper plates and plastic cups, watching him, waiting. He could feel them calculating. The way people always calculated around power. They were trying to figure out which version of Dale they were about to get. He set his beer down on the picnic table. The bottle left a wet ring on the wood. The thing Dale would never tell anyone, the thing he barely admitted to himself in the years that followed, was that he thought about his own son in that moment. Kevin, who was 31 now and lived in Portland, and called on holidays if Dale was lucky. Kevin, who had once played trumpet in a middle school band concert that Dale missed because a shipment of aluminum stock arrived damaged, and someone had to be there to document it for the insurance claim. Kevin, who stopped asking his father to come to things sometime around the age of 12 and never started again. That was the thing that turned over in Dale's chest instead of the no. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he looked past him at the rest of them, all those faces he signed paychecks for, and he realized with a clarity that felt almost physical that he had no idea how many of their kids played trumpet or swam or did anything at all. "You know what?" he said slowly. "I'm not going to race you, Marcus." The murmuring started immediately, a low, uncertain ripple moving through the group. Dale held up his hand, and it stopped. Instead, he said, "I'm giving you the week off anyway." He paused. He could feel the shape of what he was about to say before the words arrived, and it surprised him, because he had not planned it. It came from the same place the no usually came from, Except this time the machinery had caught on something and reversed. "And here's what's actually going to happen," Dale continued, turning to face all of them now. "Starting next quarter, every parent in this company gets 4 guaranteed family event hours per month. Paid, no questions asked." Nobody spoke. Dale picked his beer back up. The bottle was warm now. He drank from it anyway. Nobody moved at first. That was the part people kept coming back to when they told the story later. Not the policy announcement, not the free vacation week, not even the look on Marcus's face. It was the stillness. The way 40-some employees stood on the grass at Lake Callaway holding paper plates and sweating cans of soda, and nobody said a single word for what felt like a full minute, but was probably closer to 10 seconds. Then Janet from accounting started clapping. It wasn't dramatic. She just shifted her potato salad to one hand and brought her palm against her wrist a few times, the way people do when they're not sure if applause is appropriate but their body decides for them. Then Rick Saldana joined in, and then the 2 women from shipping whose names Marcus could never keep straight, and then it was everyone. This strange swell of noise that didn't match the occasion at all because nothing that remarkable had actually happened. A man had asked for a morning off. Another man had said yes and then some. But that wasn't why it hit the way it did. It hit because everyone standing on that lawn had swallowed something similar at some point. Every single one of them had a version of Lily's recital tucked away somewhere. A thing they'd missed, or almost missed, or lied about missing. Parent-teacher conferences rescheduled around shift changes. School plays watched through phone screens because leaving early meant catching a look from someone. Anniversary dinners cut short. The slow accumulation of small surrenders that nobody talked about because talking about them felt like complaining. And complaining felt like weakness. And weakness at Riverside Manufacturing or anywhere else meant you weren't serious about the work. Marcus hadn't complained. That was the thing. He hadn't framed it as a grievance or a hardship. He'd walked up to the line Dale drew in the sand and said, "Yes, I'll step over it. I'll race you. I'll risk the holiday weekend. But I need you to know that my daughter exists, and she is swimming on Saturday morning, and that fact is not negotiable." He'd said it the way you'd say the sky is blue. Not with defiance, with certainty. Dale could have laughed it off. He could have said, "Sure, fine, take your morning," and left it at that. The fact that he didn't, the fact that he stood there and let the request land on him and then turned it into something bigger, that said something about Dale too. People forgot that part sometimes. They wanted the story to be about the little guy standing up to the boss, but it was also about a boss who heard something true and let it change his mind in front of everyone. That took its own kind of nerve. Dale Hutchins had built his reputation on consistency, on the idea that the rules applied to everyone equally, himself included. Tearing that open at a picnic because a quiet man mentioned his daughter's swim recital was not a small thing for him. But Marcus was the one people remembered. They remembered because he hadn't been trying to make a point. He wasn't performing. He'd simply refused to separate himself into 2 people. The employee and the father, the way the world kept asking him to. He'd stood there as one whole person and let that be enough. In the weeks that followed, the story moved through the plant floor and the front offices and out into the parking lot conversations that happened after shifts. It changed a little each time, the way stories do. Some versions had Marcus giving a speech. Some had Dale crying. Neither of those things happened. What happened was smaller and stranger and harder to explain, which was probably why people kept trying. A man raised his hand at a company picnic. He said he'd compete. He said he had one condition, and the condition was simply this: "My child is real, and I will be there." That was all, and it was everything. The community pool at Eastside Recreation smelled like chlorine, and concession stand nachos, and the particular humidity that only exists inside buildings where water has no business being indoors. Marcus had arrived 40 minutes early. He sat in the 3rd row of the aluminum bleachers, then moved to the 2nd row, then finally just walked down to the front and planted himself on the end of the first bench, where the metal was still cold through his khakis. He had not slept well, not because of anything Dale had said or done, not because of the policy announcement that was still rattling around the break room like a quarter in a dryer. He had not slept well because Lily had asked him 3 times before bed whether he would really be there. And each time he said yes. And each time she studied his face the way children do when they are trying to decide if an adult is telling the truth or just saying what sounds right. The pool was 25 meters. 4 lanes roped off with those plastic floats that always looked like oversized candy to him. A folding table near the diving end held a portable speaker and a clipboard, and a woman in a Eastside Aquatics polo who kept adjusting her whistle lanyard like it was a necklace that wouldn't sit right. Other parents filtered in. Mothers mostly, a few fathers, one grandmother who brought her own seat cushion and a Ziploc bag of orange slices that she offered to no one in particular. Marcus nodded at a couple of faces he recognized from drop-off. He did not make conversation. He was not here for conversation. The kids came out in groups sorted by age. The 6-year-olds first, wobbly and wide-eyed, goggles already fogged, then the 7s. Then Lily's group, the 8s, walking single file along the wet tile in their team swimsuits with their caps pulled low. Lily was 4th in line. She was looking at her feet, watching each step. And then she looked up and scanned the bleachers the way someone scans a crowd at an airport arrival gate, fast and desperate, and trying not to show it. She found him. The thing she did with her face was not quite a smile. It was closer to relief. The muscles around her eyes softened, and her shoulders dropped a 1/4 inch, and she gave him one small nod, like they had made a deal and he had kept his end of it. He nodded back. Her event was the 50-meter freestyle, 8 girls lined up behind the blocks. Lily drew lane 3. She climbed up and curled her toes over the edge and stared down at the water with an expression Marcus recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror more times than he could count. The look of someone who is afraid but has decided that being afraid is not a good enough reason to stop. The whistle blew. She hit the water clean. Her stroke was not the fastest and it was not the prettiest, but it was steady and it was hers. She breathed every 3 strokes the way her coach had taught her. She did not look sideways at the other lanes. She touched the wall at the turn and pushed off and came back with her chin tucked and her arms reaching, and Marcus realized he was gripping the edge of the bleacher so hard that the aluminum ridge was leaving a line across his palm. She touched the wall second. 2 girls' widths behind first place, a full body length ahead of third. Second place in her age group. Lily pulled herself out of the pool and found him again in the bleachers, and this time it was a real smile, full and uncomplicated, the kind that children give when they have done something hard, and the person who matters most was watching. Marcus clapped until his hands stung. He did not care that his eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. There was no one in that building whose opinion mattered more than the small dripping girl now walking toward him with a ribbon in her hand and chlorine in her hair. He had taken the half day anyway, policy or not. But this time, nobody had questioned it. The story moved through Riverside Manufacturing the way most real stories do, which is to say unevenly and with significant distortion. By the following Monday, at least 3 people claimed Marcus had actually raced Dale and won. Someone in shipping said Marcus had threatened to quit. A woman in accounts receivable told her husband that the owner of the company had cried, which was not true, though Dale's eyes had done something complicated in the moment before he set down his beer. And maybe that was close enough. But the version that stuck, the one people kept coming back to when they retold it over lunch or on smoke breaks, or in the particular hush of a long drive home, was simpler than any of those. A man had raised his hand. He had agreed to compete. And then he had named, out loud and without flinching, the one thing he was not willing to lose. There was no trick to it. That was what made it hard to dismiss. Marcus came back to work the following week, and nothing about him had changed. He clocked in at 7:15. He ate his lunch at the same table by the window, near the loading dock where he had eaten his lunch for 11 years. He did not mention the picnic. He did not mention the new policy. When someone in the break room brought it up, he nodded once and said something about the coffee being burnt, and that was the end of it. But something had shifted in the way people looked at him, or maybe in the way they looked at themselves. There was a machinist named Terence who had missed his son's kindergarten graduation the previous spring because he had been afraid to ask for the morning off. He had not told anyone this. He had carried it in the quiet way that working parents carry such things, folded up and pressed flat and stored in a place where it would not interfere with productivity. After the picnic, Terence went home and pulled up the school calendar on his phone and circled every date for the coming year. He did not ask permission, he simply informed his supervisor, and his supervisor, who had also been at the picnic, simply nodded. That was the thing about what Marcus did. It gave other people a vocabulary for something they had always felt but never said, not because they lacked the words, but because they had been trained to believe the words were inappropriate. That fatherhood and motherhood were private matters. That your children existed in one world, and your labor existed in another, and the wall between them was load-bearing and must not be touched. Marcus had touched it. Gently. Almost accidentally. And it had not come down, but it had swayed just enough for everyone to see that it was not made of stone. It was made of agreement, of habit, of the collective decision to pretend that the people who showed up every morning at 7:15 did not also have somewhere else they desperately needed to be. Dale Hutchins, for his part, never spoke publicly about the moment again. The policy went into effect at the start of the next quarter, exactly as he had promised. 4 hours per month, paid. No questions asked. It cost the company almost nothing. It had always cost almost nothing. That was perhaps the most difficult part of the whole story to sit with. Years later, when Lily Webb was old enough to understand what had happened at that picnic, she asked her father why he had volunteered for the race in the first place. Marcus thought about it for a while. He was not a man who answered questions quickly. "Because I wanted them to know I would show up for both," he said finally. "For the job and for you. I just needed them to understand that if it ever came down to a choice, it was never going to be a choice." Lily nodded. She was 16 by then and had long since quit competitive swimming. But she remembered the morning she had placed second and looked up from the pool and seen her father in the front row, clapping like the sound of it could hold the whole world together. It could. It had. It did.